Well, welcome viewers and listeners to another edition of CHP Talks. I'm here with one of our favorite guests again, Kris Sims from the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. She is the Alberta Director, and she's a longtime journalist in Canada. She was a longtime journalist. Now she's doing a different kind of journalism. One of the founding reporters for Sun News Network. She's worked in and around government for more than 20 years. She's been a frequent and much appreciated contributor to this program. Kris Sims, thank you for joining us again from Alberta. Is it cold there today?
It's a little cold. It's been so busy with what Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is doing here that I haven't actually been outside much today, but there's
Yeah.
quite a bit of snow on the ground, probably about 6 inches or so here in Lethbridge, and pretty chilly. I had the kids bundled up pretty tight this morning.
Okay, well, good. We've got probably about on the ground here in northern BC or Telkwa here, we've got about 1.5 feet of snow, I guess. And it's been a little bit cool. It's not like the temperatures you can get there in Alberta, but we have had it down to minus 23, I think, one night.
Ooh, that's
Yeah,
brisk.
yeah. Anyway, it's warmed up a little bit now. I got back in the habit of plugging the car in when it wouldn't start. So, yeah. Anyway, there are some other things that won't start around here, and that is the Parliament of Canada seems to be need a recharge and to be plugged in a little bit. What's happening? What's your take from Canadian Taxpayers Federation on that event? Justin Trudeau stepping down and the prorogation of Parliament and all that we see unfolding around us.
Well, we're in store for a lot of drama, and unfortunately, it's taxpayers who are on the hook for all of it. So, for folks who don't know, your member of parliament is still going to be paid, even when the House is prorogued, and that just continues on. So, your average backbencher member of parliament, meaning somebody who is not a cabinet minister or a party leader, they're paid more than $200,000 per year, plus all sorts of perks like getting their food and travel covered quite often. And if you're a cabinet minister, then it jumps up. It's more than $300,000, give or take, that you're now taking home as a cabinet minister. So during prorogation, all of that continues to flow. And even during an election campaign, in most critically, the cabinet ministers are still cabinet ministers until the power of government changes hands. So even during an election campaign, the Minister of Finance will continue to be so, et cetera, et cetera. And that's, of course, because you need to still deal with international issues and obligations. Money still needs to move through the House, et cetera. So we've got a situation where things are prorogued. So basically everything is now frozen and it will be reset. So when the House comes back, when Parliament comes back, because it's not just the House, it's the Senate as well. When the Parliament comes back on March 24th, soon after that, they need to have a speech from the throne. And it's called that, of course, because that is handed down from His Majesty King Charles III, because we are a constitutional monarchy. So things will get started again. Have to jump it a little bit on March 24th. But what's fascinating here is that the throne speech happens, and that is usually an automatic confidence vote. And if they get voted down by the opposition parties, which they are all now promising to do, then that means we're into an election. And even if they don't, for some reason, all vote against the throne speech, we've got supply motions that are sitting there waiting to get approved. And what that means basically is to keep money flowing. So for all the departments and ministries and stuff, each quarter, they need to approve their supply motions for money transfer. That's going to happen the same week too. So this timeline is getting really crunched. So right now, the Liberal Party of Canada says that they're scrambling and in the middle of a leadership contest right now. They've got a certain amount of time, a very tight window. I believe it's 90 days to pick a new leader. And that new leader, expectedly, I'm putting a little note there because we don't know, should be sitting in the front bench of the Liberal side of the team there in the House of Commons. Now, something really weird could happen. There could be a big delay, for example, in the leadership race Maybe Prime Minister Justin Trudeau will still be sitting there on March 24th. Then what happens? Boy, oh boy. Or something odd could happen. There could be somebody who doesn't have a seat in the House of Commons who is the Liberal leader, but still automatically Prime Minister. That's going to take some doing if that happens. So that's where we're at right now.
Yeah, I suppose the MP automatic pay raises scheduled for April Fool's Day, isn't it? They would still take place regardless how the Liberals sort this thing out, if they do. And the carbon tax is scheduled to jump up also. Is that also April 1st?
Yes, because it's start of new fiscal year. Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you think? We mentioned as we were chatting before we began recording, what do you think is going to happen as far as the carbon tax? Are the Liberals, do you think they finally might get the picture that the carbon tax is not going to help them maintain a foothold in the House of Commons?
That's a great question. And they should. They ought to. They ought to realize that the carbon tax has been a millstone around their necks now for years. So depending on what happens based on our timing here with the show, we are pushing, the Taxpayers Federation are pushing Liberal MPs to scrap the carbon tax.
Okay.
They can do it.
Yeah.
So they can do this. It's all through regulation and order in council and that. This isn't something where they would need to reconvene and have an emergency meeting, et cetera, et cetera. No. So the Liberal members of Parliament, the Liberal MPs, can get together as a caucus and say, you know what, folks, let's agree. Because this is the Trudeau carbon tax. Yeah. Trudeau is heading out the door. Right. Get him to tuck his little carbon tax under his arm.
Yeah.
And don't let the door hit them both on the way out.
Right.
Why are we continuing to hang on to this carbon tax as Liberal members of Parliament? And this is what's critical. You mentioned April 1st. So based on the timeline here, I had it all written out.
Yeah.
So March 24th, Parliament returns. Throne speech thereafter. Confidence votes. The opposition has promised to bring them down on those confidence votes. Candidates start door knocking a few days after that. April 1st, carbon tax hike. Can you imagine knocking on your constituent's door asking for their vote after you just hiked their carbon tax?
Yeah.
That doesn't sound like a bowl of cherries. So yeah, we're expecting the Liberal MPs to say, you know what, we're done on this ride. And frankly, any of the Liberal leadership candidates, other than the hardcore zealots, like someone like a Stéphane Guilbeault, anyone with a lick of common sense, the second thing out of their mouth after, hello, my name is, should be, and I am opposed to the carbon tax, and I'm going to eliminate it, because this has been a dud.
Yeah. So it's amazing that it has taken this much time for that to kind of get into the inner workings there. But, we'll be pleased to see that happen. I hope Canadians aren't so foolish as to think, oh, well, carbon tax is gone. Let's go back to what we were doing before. I don't
imagine it'll change the outcome of the vote, but it is the right thing to do.
Yeah.
And it would be smart of those Liberal MPs to at least try to save a bit of dignity when they're hitting the hustings. I ultimately don't think it'll change the outcome of the election, but at the end of the day, we'll have a carbon tax gone.
In the meantime, for the next 2 months, however long this Liberal leadership campaign goes on, we're sure taxpayers will be funding almost nonstop advertising for the next Liberal leader, whoever that turns out to be, because they're already, saying this one, Christy Clark and, Chrystia Freeland, I can't imagine that being a possibility, but but CBC, that we're paying their bills, and they are going to be covering it from dawn till dusk for the next couple of months. I kind of a little bit envious in the sense that Christian Heritage Party never gets hardly a mention by CBC, but even like Pierre Poilievre, they probably aren't really on the same page with him, but he gets quite a bit of coverage as sort of the obvious next likely prime minister. So, I was going to ask you about a couple of other bills. Bill C-63 is still going through the House, I believe, and C-293, I might have them mixed up. 293, the pandemic
Hmm.
preparation and prevention bill, is in the Senate. It has been passed by all three readings in the House. What happens to those bills? Can we consider them gone, or are they likely to be resurrected?
So they'll be gone. So unless something crazy happens and the Trudeau Liberals are reelected to a majority government, I can't see that happening, but never say never, and you don't anticipate outcomes. But all things going the trajectory that they are, they'll be gone.
Yeah.
So what happens with prorogation is that all of the bills that have not yet received royal assent, so like that tap from the king, from the Senate, okay, the Governor General, as a representative of the Crown, has to do that. All bills that have not received royal assent die on the order paper.
Yeah.
They no longer exist. Only in rare circumstances, when a new parliament is formed, could a previous bill that was in process be brought back at the stage it was at. But it requires unanimous consent.
Okay.
So say there was something, I don't know, a little bit more meaningful or sentimental that was a private member's bill, you know, an endowment or naming something after someone that all members of parliament wanted to do, or an apology, something like that.
Right.
Then they would all agree to bring it back from the previous house, from the previous parliament, and it would be reinstated at that stage. So if it was at second reading or at committee or in Senate or whatever it is, it would pop back up in that way. But that's pretty rare.
Yeah.
It has been good because it's saved people a lot of legwork. So say you've done a lot of work on a private member's bill and it's really important and people support it. It saves taxpayers time and money because they don't need to redo it. But generally speaking, C-63 and that pandemic bill and stuff, toast, gone, out of here. And
Well,
Pierre Poilievre has agreed to get rid of the censorship and Online Harm Act and all that other stuff. And I believe he's also on record saying he'll get rid of that pandemic bill as well.
Okay.
So basically, it's a clean slate. If there's a new government, new parliament, clean slate. They start writing Bill 1 again.
Well, that's, there might be a silver lining to this because those are terrible bills.
Oh, they are.
Very damaging to any sense of democracy in the country, free speech and all that. So, they passed enough. They did enough damage with the ones that have been passed into law already. But there's another one you probably know more about than I do, and that has to do with capital gains.
Yes.
Can you speak to that issue, where that's at?
Yeah, there's a real fight going on there right now. So as of right now, it had not yet been passed. So the capital gains tax increase, which the Conservatives were opposed to, they were so opposed to it, they made like a 15-minute mini documentary about it. It was quite something. And it's actually just a really interesting bit of footage. It reminded me of back in the 1950s and 60s of these are the means of production and how things work, kind of an educational video. So I would recommend people watch it, show their kids. However, the capital gains tax increase had not yet bingo bango gone into regulation. However, as of the time that you and I are talking, and it's a moving target, the CRA sounds like it's still implementing it.
Oh,
The Canada Revenue Agency that
really?
I know it is way up there. So there are economists and lawyers and deputy ministers involved in that mess right now.
Oh, no.
So the short answer is we're not sure what's happening with the capital gains tax increase.
No.
But it sounds like the CRA is going along as business as usual, as if it were law. So that will be a big hairy mess.
So that was legislation that has not yet passed through the House, and yet the CRA is already implementing it, which is another another kind of glimpse into the what they call the deep state or whatever, the bureaucracy that has built up over the years that somehow, in many cases, continues to operate uh, even if there's a change of government.
Hmm.
You
To
know,
your point, so usually it's something that you wouldn't really think about or notice. So
yeah,
say you're in the middle of an election campaign or the house is prorogued or whatever, you still go to the passport office. You can still call Citizenship Immigration Canada if you're overseas. Like all that stuff still happens.
right,
And there are an enormous number of people in that world. It
yeah,
is permanent government, the bureaucracy or the swamp, as President Donald Trump likes to call it. And so that machine just keeps functioning. And so it's actually becomes one of the issues. No matter which political government gets reelected, those staffers and those ministers are seen as temps. They're kind of interlopers in the office from a lot of bureaucrats' point of view. Now, to be fair, some of those government employees do work hard. I have worked with people who are
yeah,
very conscientious,
sure,
etc. The issue here, especially with something as important as capital gains, is twofold. One, we don't know if this is actual taxation with representation, because if it hasn't gotten royal assent, then how could they be doing that?
yeah.
And two, it just causes uncertainty. So if you're an investor or whatever, some mucky muck corporate person who invests a lot of money, and you're not quite sure if there's a capital gains tax increase in Canada, like it can get pretty crazy.
Yeah.
So yeah, as of right now, suffice to say, there's a bit of a mess going on right now with capital gains tax increase.
I like to refer to future generations, the unborn, some of whom will never be born because of abortion in this country, but they are victims of taxation without representation because their their hard-earned money that they have not been born to, they haven't come into the jobs yet that they will have in the future. But every time the government borrows a dollar and pays interest on it, the unborn generations who have no vote or say in other than through us, the current generation, they're being saddled with a debt that they didn't incur, they don't want, and will not be able to bear. So that's a big deal. It was not the only issue in the American Revolution, but it certainly was a critical one. And
It really was something that Pierre Poilievre had said when he sat down with Dr. Jordan Peterson. I'm sure I don't know if you had a chance to watch it yet, but it's quite something. I would recommend everybody watch that interview. It's an hour and a half long, covers a lot of territory. And he called inflation an immoral tax. And that's, of course, because there's no vote on it. There's no representation. It just happens automatically.
yeah,
And I agree. It's a
yeah,
deeply immoral tax, inflation. And don't let folks tell you that this was just some natural global phenomenon like, a blizzard. No, it was not. It was caused by the Trudeau government's actions. They printed
exactly.
hundreds of billions of dollars out of thin air, and they locked down the means of production for years
Yeah,
during the lockdowns. Those two things, you've got a perfect storm of inflation. So that's their fault. That's the government's fault. Two,
absolutely.
to your point on debt, that is another immoral tax, because you're absolutely right. My great grandchildren are going to be paying for this Trudeau government's racking up of debt. This government, this current government, it just blows my mind, has doubled the national debt. Doubled it. If you think back to all the previous prime ministers, I know a lot of your viewers are homeschoolers, and so they take this really seriously. I've seen them do timelines and illustrations of Canadian history. It's amazing.
Sure.
Go back, Harper, Mulroney, the first Trudeau, Diefenbaker, all the way down the railroad to Sir John A. Macdonald. Picture the time where those prime ministers served. World Wars, Great Depressions. Picture their debts. Double them. That's what this guy's done. It's
Yeah,
astonishing.
yeah,
And now, to your point, the interest we are paying on the debt, sir, is equivalent to the GST.
yeah. I think the last time I looked, it was about $125 million a day, but that's probably moved up from there.
It's a shocking
Um,
amount of money. $1.2 trillion. If you started counting right now in loonies, it would take you 30,000 years to count to 1 trillion. I know, it gets a bit grim.
Yeah. So I wonder if the taxpayers, have you ever done a deep dive on the cost of the Trudeau pandemic response? It would be impossible to completely, fence that in because there's so many, spin-offs from it, whether it's, even the police forces, use of police forces, court costs that have come out of it. But I'm thinking about the direct costs that they paid people to either sit on the couch or, I don't know how you would ever, kind of put that into a net and put it out as a number. But I'm sure that a significant part of the increase in our government debt was a result of not of the pandemic, but of the Trudeau's response to the pandemic.
Yeah, and so that's a good differentiation in your language there.
Yeah.
It's really important because sometimes people will say, oh, that was the pandemic, again, as if this were some force of nature that just passively hit them. No, choices were made and actions were taken. Money was spent and or wasted or not. So first off, when it comes to the lockdowns, we have not done a deep dive to add all of them up. To be fair, our team is small but mighty. And so we will focus on like a laser on certain things, like, defunding the CBC, scrapping the carbon tax, that sort of stuff. However, who knows with the next government? They could have, and I don't want to speak for them, but with a new government, new ministers, I know there's a lot of MPs who are in there right now and folks who are running for parliament who took the last 5 years really darn seriously. And they kept notes and they kept tabs. So maybe they may want to look into that with a full fiscal inquiry.
Yeah.
Just to add it up. Just, pro, anti, whatever it is. To your point, at least find out how much that cost, what the dollar figure was, what the invoice was for what was done during those last few years. Yeah. So maybe a new government would want to do a really deep dive on that, because we have seen some auditors' reports coming out on CERB, for example, showing waste, showing, people who were in prison or, people who it shouldn't have gotten it, got it. Yeah. And this is not to impugn the people, I must say, whose businesses and livelihoods were locked down through no fault of their own. Like, we would never go after those folks. We're talking about government mismanagement, handing out money willy-nilly as if they were blind. Yeah. So we already know that there has been a lot of waste there. All a new government would need to do is give that auditor free rein and say, here's 9 months or a year. Here's your scope. Go find it. So that would probably be a very wise thing for accountability for taxpayers. So we know. Second, to your point on racking up the debt and because of, lockdowns, the Trudeau government was already spending like water comes from a fire hose before the lockdowns. Cool. So in the year 2018, 2019, remember then? It feels like a universe ago, right?
Yeah.
The Trudeau government spent more money in that calm, normal year than it did in any 1 year of the Second World War, adjusted for inflation and population. So imagine back, in 1943, we're in the middle of fighting the Nazis. We're building up our Navy. We're building up our Air Force. We're making stuff. We're spending so much money. The Trudeau government in that one little normal, calm budget year still spent more money. So that was before the lockdowns. And they kept on doing it well after. Like the last fiscal update where they blew through their $40-something billion guardrail, there is no lockdowns right now. There's no excuse for it. So for your friends and family who try to say, oh, but there was a pandemic.
Well, yeah, and think back to World War I. At that time, Canada, had a major part in that conflict. the costs involved. Aside from the human cost, there certainly was a tremendous or terrible loss of life. But they were dealing with the Spanish flu at that time, which many say was much more significant than COVID as far as a pathogen to be dealt with. So they dealt with the Spanish flu, fought World War I, and they didn't spend the kind of money that this government has spent on their fancy trips to, Brussels and wherever to meet with other like-minded world leaders and spend taxpayer dollars on what was the cost of his airplane food for Trudeau's?
Oh, the airplane food when they were flying around. It was, and one of them was, I think it was $100,000, and I think the other one was $200,000. The most recent one that they went globetrotting on, I think it was just over $70,000 that they spent on. I know. It's mind-numbing, isn't it?
Yeah. And then, of course, the jet fuel and any concern about carbon. I mean, I'm not on the climate change crisis bandwagon, but if people are concerned about carbon, the Prime Minister has used so much more carbon in his travel than dozens of Canadian families do in a year, right? So. Anyway, so we have some exciting few weeks ahead, or a couple of months, and we certainly at CHP are getting ready for that scrap that's coming up, and wanting to offer voters some hope for a return to sanity and to stand shoulder to shoulder with good conservatives that are taking up that challenge, and so. We will see, but thank you so much for enlightening us regarding, especially these bills that will die on your order paper. That's good news, and we hope that transpires as you say, and that when we come back, when Parliament resumes in March 24th, we hope that's a very short time that this government will sit in those seats, and that they will have to face voters at the polls.
We do too. It should be a record short sitting. And again, the election is the ultimate form of accountability. Folks, I encourage everybody, no matter who you usually vote for, read up on all the parties' plans, their campaign plans and their promises. Talk to your friends and neighbors, talk to your family, and make the best decision for yourselves.
Very good. Well, Kris Sims, taxpayer.com. For those who want to know more about Kris's work in Alberta or the rest of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation across the country, it's tremendous what you folks do. We appreciate it so much, and thanks very much for taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Bye-bye.